Hi everyone, welcome to Threads of Kindness. Life's relationships can be fragile, and today we're bringing you 3 gripping stories that show just how far people will go for love, loyalty, or control. From a bride outsmarting her controlling mother-in-law, to a father-daughter bond tested by a new girlfriend, and a wedding torn apart by jealousy, each story offers a lesson in resilience and forgiveness. If you haven't already, click that subscribe button and join us for these unforgettable tales. Lila had always been a dreamer, though life often reminded her to keep her feet firmly on the ground. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, she learned early on the value of hard work and resilience. Now in her early 20s, she worked at a bustling fast food restaurant, saving every spare dollar to pursue her dream of becoming a chef. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and Lila took pride in it. It was during one particularly hectic lunch rush that Ethan first walked into her life. He was strikingly handsome, with an easy smile, and a demeanor that exuded confidence. Dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place in the greasy, fluorescent-lit restaurant, Ethan stood out like a beacon. Lila noticed him immediately, though she assumed he was like many others who passed through. There for a quick meal and then gone. Just another face in the crowd. But Ethan wasn't just passing through. He'd been there on business and had decided to grab a bite before his next meeting. When his turn came, Lila greeted him with her usual cheerful professionalism, though she couldn't help but feel a little self-conscious under his gaze. Ethan, for his part, was struck by her warmth and sincerity, a refreshing change from the superficial conversations he was used to in his social circles. Their exchange was brief, but left a lasting impression on both of them. Over the next few weeks, Ethan began frequenting the restaurant more often. At first, Lila thought it was a coincidence, but it soon became clear he was there for more than the burgers. He'd strike up conversations, asking about her day or complimenting her on her bright smile. Despite her initial hesitation, Lila found herself drawn to Ethan's charm and kindness. He wasn't like the other wealthy, polished men she'd encountered in her life. There was an authenticity to him that she couldn't ignore. Their relationship developed quickly. Ethan admired Lila's determination and work ethic, while Lila found comfort in Ethan's unwavering support and genuine interest in her aspirations. They were an unlikely pair. Ethan, the son of a wealthy and influential family, and Lila, a young woman working tirelessly to make ends meet. But they balanced each other in ways that surprised them both. However, not everyone was pleased with their blossoming romance. Ethan's mother, Margaret, loomed large over his life. A formidable woman with a sharp wit and an even sharper tongue, Margaret had built her life around control of her family, her social circle, and, to an extent, her son. She had always envisioned Ethan marrying someone from their social class, someone who could uphold the family's reputation and navigate their elite world with ease. Lila, with her humble background and modest occupation, was far from the image Margaret had in mind. At first, Margaret hid her disdain behind a veneer of politeness. When Ethan introduced Lila to his family, Margaret greeted her with a warm smile and effusive compliments. "So lovely to meet you, dear," she said, her tone saccharine. "Ethan has told us so much about you." Lila, nervous but eager to make a good impression, responded graciously, unaware of the judgment simmering beneath Margaret's surface. Over time, Margaret's true feelings began to seep through in subtle ways. She would make pointed comments about Lila's job, masking them as innocent observations. "It must be exhausting standing on your feet all day," she'd say with a sympathetic tilt of her head. Or, "Have you ever thought about pursuing something different? Something more stable?" Lila sensed the underlying condescension but chose not to engage. She loved Ethan and didn't want to create tension with his family. Margaret's subtle disapproval soon evolved into more direct interference. She began inviting Ethan to events and outings without Lila, often pairing him with women from their social circle. "You'll love Jenna," Margaret said once, referring to the daughter of a family friend. "She's so accomplished and well-traveled. I'm sure you two will have so much to talk about." Ethan, to his credit, always declined such invitations, making it clear that his heart belonged to Lila. But Margaret wasn't one to give up easily. As the months went on, Margaret's attempts to undermine their relationship became more calculated. She would orchestrate situations designed to highlight the gap between their worlds, inviting Lila to extravagant dinners where she'd feel out of place, or making offhand remarks about the sacrifices Ethan was making to be with her. "I just hope you appreciate everything Ethan is giving up for this relationship," Margaret said one evening, her tone laced with faux concern. Lila, hurt but determined, refused to let Margaret's words shake her confidence. Despite the challenges, Ethan and Lila's relationship grew stronger. They supported each other through difficult times, shared their dreams for the future, and built a foundation of trust and love that Margaret couldn't crack. But the strain of Margaret's disapproval weighed heavily on them, particularly on Ethan, who struggled to reconcile his love for Lila with his loyalty to his family. One evening, after a particularly tense family dinner, Ethan apologized to Lila. "I hate that you have to deal with this," he said, holding her hands tightly. "But I promise, no matter what, I'm on your side." Lila smiled through her tears, grateful for his unwavering commitment. Still, a part of her wondered how much longer they could endure Margaret's relentless interference. Little did they know, Margaret was about to escalate her efforts to an entirely new level, one that would test their love and resilience in ways they couldn't have anticipated. For Margaret, this wasn't just about disapproval, it was about control, and she wasn't prepared to lose. Margaret was a woman who believed that money solved everything. It had bought her social standing, her luxurious lifestyle, and the best opportunities for her family. So, in her mind, it could also buy her son's freedom from what she saw as an ill-suited relationship. Lila wasn't just a poor match in Margaret's eyes, she was a threat to the carefully constructed world Margaret had built for her family. One evening, Margaret decided it was time to take matters into her own hands. She invited Lila to her estate under the pretense of wanting to get to know her better. Though suspicious, Lila agreed, hoping to finally bridge the gap between her and Ethan's mother. Margaret's estate was intimidating, with its sprawling gardens and an opulent dining room filled with antique furniture that seemed more suited to a museum than a home. Lila sat nervously at the edge of a velvet chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Margaret entered with her signature air of grace, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of wine. "Thank you for coming, dear," she said, handing Lila a glass. "I've been meaning to have a heart-to-heart with you for some time." Lila smiled politely, though the tension in the room was palpable. "I appreciate the invitation, Mrs. Whitmore." Margaret sat across from her, crossing her legs elegantly. "Please call me Margaret," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Now, Lila, I've been observing your relationship with Ethan, and while I admire your tenacity, I can't help but feel that this isn't the best path for either of you." Lila's stomach tightened. She had anticipated some pushback, but hearing it so plainly still stung. "With all due respect, Ethan and I love each other. We make each other happy, and that's what matters." Margaret's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she regained her composure. "Of course, dear, love is important, but so is practicality. You see, Ethan comes from a world that requires a certain sophistication. I'm not saying you're incapable, but the pressures of that life are enormous. I worry about how that might affect you." Lila met Margaret's gaze, refusing to back down. "I understand that Ethan's life is different from mine, but we're willing to face those challenges together." Margaret leaned forward slightly, her tone softening. "I can see you care about him, Lila. That's why I'm offering you a way out, something that will allow you to build the future you deserve." From a side table, Margaret pulled out an envelope and placed it on the coffee table between them. Lila stared at it, confusion and dread washing over her. "What is this?" Lila asked cautiously. Margaret's expression turned sympathetic. "It's $10,000. Enough to start over, perhaps even pursue those dreams of becoming a chef. All I ask is that you leave Ethan and allow him to find someone more suited to his life." Lila's heart pounded in her chest. The sheer audacity of the offer was both insulting and infuriating. She opened her mouth to respond, but Margaret continued before she could speak. "Think about it, dear. You're young, intelligent, and full of potential. This relationship, while meaningful now, could hold you back in the long run. I'm offering you freedom, Lila. No strings, no questions, just a fresh start." For a moment, Lila considered standing up and leaving without another word, but something in Margaret's expression stopped her, a glint of smugness, as though she was certain she'd won. Lila realized that walking away wasn't enough. If Margaret wanted to play games, Lila would play too. She took a deep breath, forcing a calm expression onto her face. "You're right, Margaret. This has been difficult. I need to think about it." Margaret's smile widened, satisfied that her plan was working. "Take all the time you need, dear. I only want what's best for both of you." Lila took the envelope, feeling the weight of the cash inside. She nodded politely, excused herself, and left the estate without looking back. Once she was outside, she allowed herself a moment to process what had just happened. The nerve of that woman, Lila thought, clutching the envelope tightly. She wasn't going to let Margaret dictate her life or ruin her relationship with Ethan. Over the next few weeks, Lila kept the interaction to herself. She didn't tell Ethan, knowing it would only create more conflict. Instead, she focused on their relationship, working harder than ever to show Margaret that love was stronger than any scheme she could devise. Meanwhile, Margaret believed she had succeeded. She watched Ethan and Lila from a distance, confident that the relationship would soon crumble. Little did she know, her plan had only strengthened Lila's resolve. When Ethan proposed a month later, Margaret's carefully laid plans unraveled. As she stood in stunned silence at the announcement, Lila met her gaze with quiet defiance. Margaret smiled tightly, but inside she fumed. How could her offer have failed? Margaret's frustration grew as she realized that confronting Lila about the money would expose her own deceit, leaving her powerless to stop the wedding. Margaret's carefully controlled world was beginning to slip through her fingers, and for the first time, she didn't know what to do. Lila, however, was more determined than ever. She wasn't just fighting for her love. She was fighting for her place in Ethan's life, proving that no amount of money or manipulation could break the bond they had built. The announcement of Ethan and Lila's engagement sent shockwaves through Margaret's carefully curated world. At the family dinner where Ethan revealed his plans, Margaret's smile was tight, her knuckles white as she gripped her glass of wine. While the room filled with congratulations, Margaret sat silent, calculating her next move. She couldn't confront Lila, not without exposing the $10,000 bribe and her own underhanded schemes. Instead, she played the part of the supportive mother, though every word of encouragement felt like poison on her tongue. As wedding preparations began, Margaret quietly observed, searching for ways to reassert control. But Lila proved resilient. She navigated the planning process with grace, winning over extended family members and impressing even the harshest critics within Ethan's circle. Margaret's usual tactics of subtle sabotage fell flat against Lila's unshakable determination. It was maddening. On the wedding day, Margaret sat in the front row, dressed impeccably in a designer gown. But as Lila walked down the aisle, radiant in her dress, Margaret felt an unfamiliar pang of defeat. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She'd spent years shaping Ethan's future, crafting a path for him that didn't include Lila. Yet here they were, exchanging vows, their love stronger than ever. Margaret maintained her composure throughout the ceremony, but her mind raced. As the newlyweds shared their first dance, she found herself grappling with emotions she rarely confronted: jealousy, bitterness, and an unsettling sense of irrelevance. Ethan had chosen Lila, and there was nothing she could do to change that. Months turned into years, and Margaret's resentment festered in silence. She watched as Ethan and Lila built a life together, their love weathering every challenge. Margaret's once subtle disapproval became a quiet simmering beneath the surface of family gatherings. Every smile she forced for Lila felt like another nail in the coffin of her influence over Ethan. The twist came during a casual family dinner when Ethan, now a father himself, spoke of Lila with admiration. "She's the most hardworking person I know," he said, his voice filled with pride. "She never let anything or anyone distract her from what truly matters." Margaret's heart sank. She knew what Ethan didn't, that his wife had taken the $10,000 bribe and used it to help build their life together. The very tool Margaret had intended to destroy their love had become a stepping stone to their success. She couldn't say a word, not without exposing her own malice. As Margaret sat at the table, watching Ethan and Lila laugh together, she realized the extent of her failure. Her silence was her punishment, a reminder of a battle she had lost not to Lila, but to love itself. And while Ethan and Lila thrived, Margaret was left with nothing but the bitterness of her own regrets. Emily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, carefully unpacking a box of ornaments. Each one held a memory, some from her childhood, others from her mother's collection. She smiled softly as she pulled out the delicate star that always went on top of the tree, her favorite part of the tradition she and her dad, Robert, had upheld every Christmas. The tradition had become even more sacred since her mother's passing 5 years ago. It was their way of holding on to her memory and finding comfort during the holidays. "Hey, Dad!" Emily called out, holding up the star. "Are you ready for the tree?" Robert entered the room with a distracted smile, carrying a box of lights. "Sure thing, kiddo. Let's get started." The tree decorating was always a special time for Emily and Robert. They'd laugh over the ornaments Emily had made as a child, hum along to Christmas songs, and reminisce about her mom's love for the holidays. It was the one tradition that had stayed consistent in their lives, no matter how much else had changed. This year, however, something was different. A new presence loomed over their holiday season: Vanessa, Robert's girlfriend. Vanessa had come into their lives a few months earlier, and while Emily had initially been open to the idea of her dad dating again, her feelings quickly shifted. Vanessa was charming when Robert was around, but her interactions with Emily were cold and dismissive. She made little effort to get to know Emily, and often monopolized Robert's attention. "Vanessa's coming over tonight," Robert said casually, as he untangled a string of lights. "She wants to help with the tree." Emily's hands froze mid-air, the star still in her grasp. "Help with the tree?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Yeah," Robert replied, not noticing her tone. "She's excited to join in." Emily swallowed her frustration. This was their tradition, something sacred between her and her dad, but she didn't want to seem unwelcoming, so she nodded and forced a small smile. "Okay." That evening, Vanessa arrived, sweeping into the room with a bright smile and an air of confidence. She was carrying a gift bag, which she handed to Robert with a flourish. "For the tree," she said. Inside were several oversized, glittery ornaments that clashed with the sentimental, mismatched decorations Emily and Robert always used. "These are great," Robert said, oblivious to Emily's discomfort. "Thanks, Vanessa." As they decorated the tree, Emily tried to focus on the ornaments she loved, placing them carefully among the branches. But Vanessa dominated the process, rearranging ornaments Emily had already hung and insisting on using her glittery decorations. Emily's protests were brushed aside with a laugh. "It's just a tree, sweetheart," Vanessa said. "No need to get so worked up." Emily bit her tongue, not wanting to cause a scene. But when it came time to place the star on top, the final touch that she and her dad always did together, her patience snapped. "I'll get the step stool," she said, moving toward the kitchen. When she returned, she stopped in her tracks. Robert was already on the step stool, handing the star to Vanessa. Together, they placed it on the tree, laughing as they adjusted it to sit perfectly. Emily's heart sank. This was their moment, the culmination of their tradition, and it had been taken from her. She stood frozen, gripping the step stool tightly, unsure whether to speak up or stay silent. When the tree was finished, Robert turned to her with a smile. "Doesn't it look great, Em?" Emily forced a nod, her throat tight. "Yeah, it's nice." Later that evening, as the three of them sat in the living room, Vanessa made another announcement. "By the way, I can't stand the Grinch," she said, wrinkling her nose. "How about we watch something else?" Emily's jaw tightened. Watching the Grinch had been another part of their tradition, a light-hearted way to end the night. She looked to her dad, hoping he'd back her up, but Robert just shrugged. "Sure," he said. "We can watch something new this year." It was too much. Emily excused herself, retreating to her room under the pretense of being tired. Once alone, she let the tears fall, feeling more isolated than ever. The tradition that had once brought her comfort now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by Vanessa's presence. The next morning, Emily tried to voice her feelings to her dad. "I feel like everything's changing," she said carefully. "Our traditions, they meant something to me, Dad." Robert sighed, his tone more dismissive than comforting. "Em, you're old enough to understand that things don't stay the same forever. Vanessa is part of my life now, and we're building new traditions. It's time to grow up." His words stung more than Emily expected. She had always been understanding of her dad's grief and supportive of his decision to move on, but hearing him dismiss her feelings so easily made her wonder if there was any room left for her in his new life. Vanessa, meanwhile, continued to insert herself into their family dynamic. She reorganized the house, redecorated spaces Emily had shared with her mother, and made little effort to connect with Emily. Though Robert seemed happy, Emily felt like she was losing not just her traditions, but her father as well. As Christmas approached, the tension in the house grew. Emily tried to convince herself that things would get better, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away, something she wasn't sure she'd ever get back. As the days passed, the tension between Emily and Vanessa grew more palpable. Vanessa seemed to thrive on subtle dominance, asserting her presence in ways that made Emily feel increasingly invisible. While she was sweet and attentive around Robert, her demeanor changed when they were alone. Her smiles disappeared, replaced by a curt, dismissive tone. "Why don't you clean up your room?" Vanessa suggested one afternoon, glancing into Emily's doorway. "It's starting to look like a teenager's mess." Emily bristled at the comment. Her room was tidy enough, but the way Vanessa spoke made her feel like a child. "It's fine," Emily muttered, keeping her focus on her homework. Vanessa shrugged. "Suit yourself. I'm just trying to help. Your dad deserves a home that feels peaceful." Emily didn't respond, but her chest tightened. The implication was clear. Vanessa didn't see her as part of that peace. Emily tried to talk to her dad again that evening. She found him in the living room, flipping through TV channels, his usual cheerful energy subdued. "Dad, can we talk?" she asked hesitantly, sitting down beside him. He muted the TV and turned to her. "What's on your mind?" Emily took a deep breath. "It's about Vanessa. I feel like she doesn't really like me." Robert frowned. "What makes you say that?" "She says things when you're not around," Emily explained. "Little comments that make me feel like I'm in the way, like I don't belong here anymore." Robert sighed, his expression softening. I know it's hard having someone new in the house, but Vanessa's trying. You should try too." "I have," Emily protested, her voice rising slightly. "But she's different when you're not there. She's cold, and sometimes she says things that really hurt." Robert shook his head. "Emily, you're imagining it. Vanessa loves me, and she wants to build a life with us. Maybe you're reading too much into things because you're not used to sharing." The words hit Emily like a blow. "Sharing?" she repeated. "You're saying I'm jealous?" "I'm saying it's an adjustment," Robert said gently. "Give it time." Frustrated and defeated, Emily stood up. "You're not listening to me," she said quietly before retreating to her room. That night, unable to sleep, Emily got up for a snack. As she tiptoed toward the kitchen, she heard Vanessa's voice. Pausing in the hallway, she realized Vanessa was on FaceTime. She peeked around the corner, staying out of sight. "She's so clingy," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with annoyance. "It's like having an overgrown toddler around all the time. She's ruining everything." Emily's stomach dropped. She leaned in closer, heart pounding. "Honestly," Vanessa continued, "I don't know how Robert puts up with her. She's such a burden. I keep telling him she needs to grow up or move out. Maybe both." The person on the other end laughed. "Why don't you suggest boarding school? Or better yet, get her into some kind of program far away?" Vanessa chuckled. "Believe me, I've thought about it." Emily's vision blurred with tears. She backed away, retreating to her room as quietly as possible. Her mind raced with Vanessa's words, each one cutting deeper than the last. A burden, ruining everything. Was this how Vanessa saw her? And worse, did her dad think the same thing? For hours, Emily lay in bed, replaying the conversation in her mind. The betrayal was overwhelming, not just Vanessa's cruelty, but her dad's refusal to see it. He had dismissed her concerns, brushing them aside as childish jealousy. Now she realized that staying in this house, in this dynamic, was no longer an option. The next morning, Emily called her grandparents, her mom's parents. They had always been a source of warmth and understanding, especially after her mother's passing. Between sobs, she explained everything: the broken traditions, her dad's dismissiveness, and Vanessa's late-night conversation. Her grandmother listened patiently, her voice soothing, as she assured Emily she would always have a place with them. "Come stay with us, sweetheart," her grandmother said firmly. "You deserve to feel loved and safe." Emily hesitated. She didn't want to abandon her dad, but she couldn't keep sacrificing her own well-being. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll come." Over the next few days, Emily began packing her belongings in secret. She didn't tell her dad right away, unsure how he would react, but her heart felt lighter, knowing she had a plan, a way to escape the toxic environment Vanessa had created. By the time her grandfather arrived to pick her up, Emily had steeled herself for the goodbye. As she hugged her dad, she fought back tears, wishing he could see how much she still needed him, but his distracted smile and casual, "Take care, Em," only solidified her decision. As the car pulled away, Emily looked back at the house that had once been her sanctuary. She wondered if her absence would make her dad realize what he had lost, or if he would continue to let Vanessa fill the space where their bond had once been unbreakable. Emily's departure left the house eerily quiet. Robert noticed the change immediately, the absence of her laughter, her footsteps, and the comforting presence of his daughter. At first, he tried to convince himself that this was just a phase, that Emily needed space to adjust and would come back soon. Vanessa, however, was quick to downplay the situation. "It's for the best," Vanessa said one evening as they sat in the living room. "She's with her grandparents, where she'll get all the attention she needs. We can focus on building our life together now." Robert nodded. Though Vanessa's words didn't sit right with him, deep down, he felt uneasy, but he brushed the feeling aside. He had told himself that Emily was growing up and needed to learn independence. Yet, as days turned into weeks, the emptiness in the house grew heavier. Meanwhile, Emily was adjusting to her new life at her grandparents' home. For the first time in months, she felt heard and valued. Her grandmother filled the house with warmth, cooking her favorite meals and listening to her vent about everything she had endured. Her grandfather, though gruff, offered quiet reassurance, often reminding her, "You're always welcome here." Despite the comfort, Emily couldn't shake the sadness that lingered. She missed her dad, the man he used to be before Vanessa had entered their lives. She wondered if he even missed her, or if he was too consumed by his new relationship to notice her absence. Back at home, cracks began to form in Robert and Vanessa's relationship. Without Emily to deflect her frustrations, Vanessa's true colors started to show. She became more controlling, criticizing Robert's choices and asserting herself in ways that grated on his nerves. Small arguments turned into bigger fights, and Robert started to replay Emily's warnings in his mind. One evening, as they prepared dinner, Vanessa made an offhand comment that stopped Robert in his tracks. "You know," she said casually, "it's been so much more peaceful without Emily here. I can't imagine how you put up with her for so long." Robert froze, the knife in his hand hovering above a cutting board. "What did you say?" Vanessa shrugged. "I'm just saying, she was a lot to handle. Always so dramatic, always needing attention. It's been nice not having to deal with that." Robert's chest tightened. For the first time, he saw Vanessa clearly. The dismissiveness, the lack of empathy, and the subtle ways she had driven a wedge between him and Emily. Guilt washed over him as he realized how many times he had ignored his daughter's pleas for understanding. How often had he chosen Vanessa's side, dismissing Emily's pain as childish jealousy. The next morning, Robert called Emily's grandparents. His voice was thick with emotion as he asked to speak to his daughter. When Emily got on the line, she was hesitant, unsure of what he wanted. "Emily," Robert began, his voice trembling. I'm sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have been there for you." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure if an apology could mend the damage that had been done. Still, hearing her father acknowledge his mistakes was a small step toward healing. "I miss you, Em," Robert added. "I miss us. I want to fix this if you'll let me." Emily's voice was quiet, but steady. "I need time, Dad. I'm happy here right now, but maybe we can talk more soon." As the call ended, Robert was left to grapple with the consequences of his choices. He knew rebuilding their relationship would take time and effort, but he was determined to make things right. For the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to mend the bond he had almost let slip away. Sophia stood in the bridal suite of the charming countryside estate where her wedding was to be held, her heart sinking as she stared at the disaster before her. The wedding dress she had lovingly chosen, the one she had envisioned wearing as she walked down the aisle, was now unrecognizable. The delicate lace was shredded, the fabric slashed and torn as though by a vindictive hand. The once pristine gown now lay in ruins on the floor, a painful reminder of how quickly dreams could be unraveled. Her mother, Evelyn, stood beside her, her face pale with shock. "Who could have done this?" she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Sophia shook her head, struggling to contain her tears. "I don't know," she replied, though her mind was already racing through possibilities. Only a handful of people had access to the suite: her bridesmaids, her mother, and her soon-to-be mother-in-law, Eleanor. The thought made Sophia's stomach twist. Over the past few months, Eleanor's behavior had grown increasingly peculiar. While she had always been outwardly sweet and polite, there had been subtle hints of resentment beneath her polished exterior. Sophia had brushed it off as pre-wedding stress, but now she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to Eleanor's demeanor than she had initially realized. Sophia's maid of honor, Rachel, rushed into the room, her face a mix of concern and determination. "I just heard. Are you okay?" she asked, placing a comforting hand on Sophia's shoulder. "I'm not okay," Sophia admitted, her voice cracking. "The dress is ruined, Rachel. Completely ruined." Rachel crouched down to inspect the damage, her brows furrowing. "This wasn't an accident," she said firmly. "Someone did this on purpose." Evelyn nodded in agreement. "We need to find out who's responsible," she said. "And we need to do it quickly. The wedding is only 3 days away." The three women exchanged glances. an unspoken understanding passing between them. They had to figure out who had done this and why. For now, they resolved to keep the incident quiet, not wanting to create unnecessary drama before the wedding. As the day wore on, whispers of the ruined dress began to spread among the family and bridal party. While most expressed shock and sympathy, a few cast skeptical glances in Eleanor's direction. Her recent behavior had not gone unnoticed. She had been uncharacteristically involved in the wedding planning, often offering unsolicited advice and subtly undermining Sophia's choices. "Are you sure you want those flowers?" Eleanor had asked during a recent meeting with the florist, her tone light but laced with criticism. "Roses are so common. Wouldn't something more elegant suit the occasion better?" Sophia had smiled politely, biting back a retort. She didn't want to create conflict, especially not with Daniel's mother. But now, as she thought back to those moments, she couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling growing in her chest. Meanwhile, Eleanor maintained her usual pleasant demeanor, though there was a nervous edge to her smile that hadn't been there before. She offered to help wherever she could, but her presence seemed to cast a shadow over the preparations. Every interaction felt strained, as if everyone was tiptoeing around an invisible line. That evening, Sophia sat with Daniel, her fiancé, in the quiet of the estate's garden. The soft glow of string lights illuminated his concerned face as he held her hands in his. "I'm so sorry this happened," Daniel said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I don't know who would do something so cruel." Sophia hesitated, debating whether to voice her suspicions. She didn't want to accuse Eleanor without proof, but the idea gnawed at her. "Daniel," she began carefully, "has your mom seemed different to you lately?" Daniel frowned. "Different how?" "Just more critical, more involved than usual," Sophia said, choosing her words cautiously. "I've felt like she's been pushing back on a lot of our decisions." Daniel sighed, leaning back against the bench. "She's been a little intense, but that's just how she is. She cares about the family, and I think she's struggling with the idea of me getting married and starting a new chapter." Sophia nodded, though she wasn't entirely reassured. "I just don't understand who would want to sabotage the wedding." Daniel squeezed her hands. "We'll figure it out," he promised. "And no matter what, we're getting married. Dress or no dress." His words brought a small smile to Sophia's face, but the unease lingered. The next few days would be critical, not just for the wedding, but for uncovering the truth about what had happened. As Sophia returned to the bridal suite that night, she found Rachel waiting for her, holding a small notebook. "Sophia," Rachel said, her voice low, "I think I found something." Sophia's eyes widened as Rachel handed her the notebook. Flipping through the pages, she realized it was a journal, Eleanor's journal. The entries were filled with thoughts and feelings that painted a much darker picture of her future mother-in-law than Sophia had imagined. "She's been writing about feeling replaced," Rachel explained, "about how she thinks the wedding means losing Daniel forever. It's unsettling." Sophia's hands trembled as she read the entries. One passage stood out. "If the wedding doesn't happen, maybe things can go back to the way they were. Maybe Daniel won't leave me behind." The weight of the words sank in. While it wasn't definitive proof, the journal revealed Eleanor's deep-seated fears and insecurities. Sophia's heart ached with a mix of anger and pity. If Eleanor had destroyed the dress, it wasn't out of hatred but out of desperation, a misguided attempt to hold on to her son. As the night stretched on, Sophia knew she had a decision to make. She could confront Eleanor directly or bring the journal to Daniel. Either way, the fallout would be significant. For now, she resolved to sleep on it, knowing that the truth couldn't stay hidden much longer. The next morning, Sophia woke with a heavy heart, the events of the previous day replaying in her mind. She glanced at the journal on her nightstand, its presence a silent weight on her conscience. Rachel's discovery had confirmed what Sophia had suspected. Eleanor's resentment had been simmering beneath the surface for months, but knowing this didn't make the situation any easier. Rachel joined her for breakfast, sitting across the table with a worried expression. "Are you going to tell Daniel?" she asked cautiously, sipping her coffee. Sophia sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. "I don't know. I don't want to hurt him, but he deserves to know. If I don't say anything, this could fester, but if I do, it could tear the family apart." Rachel leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Sophia, this isn't just about the dress. It's about trust. If Eleanor could go this far, what's stopping her from interfering in other parts of your life? You need to confront this, for your sake, and Daniel's." Sophia nodded, though the thought of confronting Eleanor filled her with dread. She decided to wait until later in the day, hoping the right moment would present itself. In the meantime, she kept herself busy with last-minute wedding preparations, trying to maintain an air of normalcy. Eleanor, as usual, hovered nearby, offering to help with decorations and seating arrangements. Her demeanor was cheerful, almost too cheerful, as if she were overcompensating for something. Sophia watched her carefully, noting the nervous glances and forced smiles. It was clear Eleanor sensed the tension, but didn't know the full extent of what had been uncovered. Later that afternoon, Sophia found herself alone with Daniel in the estate's library. The cozy room, lined with shelves of old books, felt like a sanctuary amidst the chaos of wedding planning. Sophia decided it was time to tell him the truth. "Daniel," she began hesitantly, "there's something I need to talk to you about. It's important." He set down the book he had been flipping through and gave her his full attention. "What is it?" Taking a deep breath, Sophia explained everything: the ruined dress, her suspicions, Rachel's discovery of the journal, and the incriminating passages. She handed him the notebook, watching as his expression shifted from confusion to shock, and finally to a deep sadness. "She wrote this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia nodded. "I don't want to believe it either, but it explains so much. The comments, the tension, the dress. It all makes sense now." Daniel closed the journal and leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I knew she was struggling with the idea of me getting married, but I never thought she'd go this far. I don't know what to say." Sophia reached for his hand. "I don't want this to come between us, Daniel. I love you, and I'm willing to work through this, but we need to address it. We can't let it fester." He nodded, his jaw tightening with determination. "You're right. We need to talk to her." That evening, the confrontation took place in the estate's sitting room. Eleanor was sitting by the fireplace, flipping through a wedding magazine, when Daniel and Sophia entered the room. She looked up with a warm smile, but her expression faltered when she saw the serious looks on their faces. "Mom," Daniel began, his tone calm but firm, "we need to talk." Eleanor set the magazine aside, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" Sophia stepped forward, holding the journal. "Eleanor, we found this," she said carefully. "It's your journal." Eleanor's face paled as her eyes flicked to the notebook in Sophia's hands. "You read it?" she asked, her voice shaking. "We did," Daniel said, his tone unyielding. "And it explains a lot. Your behavior, the tension, and most importantly, the dress." Eleanor's hands trembled as she looked between them. I don't know what you're talking about." "Mom," Daniel said gently but firmly, "don't lie to us. The journal makes it clear how you've been feeling. You thought the wedding meant losing me, didn't you?" Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes, and she finally broke down. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she admitted, her voice cracking. I felt like I was being replaced. You're my only son, Daniel. You've been my whole world, and now you're building a new life. I was scared you wouldn't need me anymore." Sophia felt a pang of sympathy, but kept her resolve. "Eleanor, we're not trying to push you out of Daniel's life. You're important to him and to me. But what you did, if you destroyed that dress, was hurtful. It crossed a line." Eleanor sobbed into her hands, unable to respond. Daniel stepped forward and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Mom, I love you, but you have to understand that this isn't okay. You can't let your fear control your actions. If you want to be part of our lives, we need trust and boundaries." The room fell silent, the weight of the conversation settling over them. Eleanor nodded slowly, her tears subsiding. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you, Sophia. I was acting out of love, but I see now how wrong I was." Sophia and Daniel exchanged a glance, their hearts heavy. They had confronted the truth, but the path forward remained uncertain. As they left the room, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that while the confrontation had brought clarity, it had also left a scar on their relationship with Eleanor, one that might never fully heal. The tension following the confrontation lingered in the days leading up to the wedding. Eleanor kept a low profile, avoiding unnecessary interactions and throwing herself into small tasks to help with the preparations. Though she had apologized, the damage had been done, and her relationship with Sophia remained fragile. For Daniel, the experience was equally difficult. Seeing his mother's vulnerabilities laid bare had left him torn between anger and pity. But his commitment to Sophia remained unwavering. On the morning of the wedding, Sophia sat in her dressing room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her bridesmaids buzzed around her, adjusting her veil and chatting excitedly, but Sophia's mind was elsewhere. The events of the past few days had left her emotionally drained, yet she was determined to move forward. She glanced at the replacement dress hanging nearby, a simpler gown than the one she'd originally chosen, but beautiful in its own right. Rachel entered the room, her expression bright. "You ready, Soph?" she asked, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Sophia nodded, offering a small smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." Meanwhile, Daniel approached his mother in the quiet corner of the estate's garden, where she sat on a bench, nervously wringing her hands. "Mom," he said softly, taking a seat beside her. "I wanted to talk before the ceremony." Eleanor looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but hopeful. "Daniel, He raised a hand gently to stop her. "I know you're sorry. I believe that. But I need you to understand something. This wedding isn't about replacing you. You're my mom, and no one can take that from you. But Sophia is my partner, and I need you to respect that. We're building a life together, and I want you to be part of it, but only if you can let go of the fear and trust that there's room for everyone." Eleanor nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'll try, Daniel. I promise I'll try." The ceremony began as planned, with a breathtaking view of the countryside serving as the backdrop. As Sophia walked down the aisle, her heart swelled with emotion. The love and support of her family and friends surrounded her, and Daniel's beaming face at the altar reminded her why this day was worth fighting for. Eleanor sat quietly in the front row, her expression a mixture of pride and regret. She clutched a handkerchief tightly, dabbing at her tears as she watched her son exchange vows with the woman he loved. While the moment was bittersweet for her, she knew it was time to let go of her insecurities and embrace this new chapter of her family's life. The wedding proceeded beautifully, filled with laughter, joy, and the promise of a new beginning. For Sophia and Daniel, it was not only the start of their marriage, but also a testament to their resilience. Though the events leading up to the day had tested them, they had emerged stronger, setting the stage for a future built on love, trust, and boundaries. As the sun set over the estate, Eleanor approached Sophia with hesitant steps. "Sophia," she began, her voice trembling, "I just wanted to say thank you for giving me a chance to make things right." Sophia looked at her, a mixture of emotions flashing across her face. "It's going to take time, Eleanor, but I'm willing to try." The two women exchanged a tentative smile, an unspoken understanding passing between them. While the road ahead wouldn't be easy, it was a start, a chance to rebuild what had been broken and move forward together as a family. Thanks for watching Threads of Kindness. Today's tales of love, loss, and resilience remind us that even in difficult times, there's room for understanding and growth. Which lesson from these stories stuck with you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay kind and stay connected.